the big picture point then is socialism is perfectly compatible.
So I hate this dominance theory. I think it's awful and terrible.
In order to fake their profits, they are faking sales.
The whole system is corrupt. The whole mechanism of the world in which we live in today is corrupt. Not corrupted by capitalism, corrupted by statism.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to watch Yaron Brook, who is an objectivist and a staunch free market capitalist, debate and tear apart a few socialists. And guys, I actually had Yaron on the reality-based podcast recently, which was very interesting, a little bit heated at times, actually, and that will be coming out soon, so keep your eyes open for that. So we'll touch on that a little bit more during this video, but let's get into the first clip now, where this socialist gives his reasons for wanting to steal all of your money.
I take this broadly as an opportunity to talk about incentives to produce under a more egalitarian system. Why would people work if they faced steeper levels of income tax or wealth tax? Well, because they want to be richer than other people, and under socialism, you could still be richer. You wouldn't have the 300-to-1 split between CEO pay and average worker pay. Instead, in a lot of cooperatives, like in the Basque region of Spain, Mondragon cooperatives that are a kind of model for a kind of socialist institution, the highest paid employees make, say, 4 times what the lowest paid employees make. And they're perfectly competitive. But put Mondragon aside, just talk about our own country. As I'm sure you both have heard this statistic, but I mean, the highest level of the top marginal tax rates used to be much, much higher in the 50s and 60s, indeed up to 90%. Was there an economic calamity? Did the dominant peacock say, I'm not going to show my peacock feathers off anymore? No, because it turns out that what human beings really want is to be better than the next guy. It doesn't matter necessarily how much better in absolute terms, or it doesn't matter how much in absolute terms they have. It doesn't matter to Bill Gates whether he has $15 trillion in his bank account or $1 billion. He just wants to have more than Mark Zuckerberg. And you can have relative inequality under socialism. We're just not going to have this ridiculous absolute inequality where you've got people with trillions, billions of dollars and people starving in the streets. So the big picture point then is socialism is perfectly compatible with allowing some inequality for the sake of incentives.
So he's saying that taxes, once upon a time, personal income tax used to be 90%. And being a socialist, that's what he's arguing for. Or he's just arguing for some government bureaucracy, probably led by him, to just own the means of productions and tell you how much money you can make, giving you little handouts. I mean, what kind of a man would argue for that? But his argument is essentially that people want to get ahead, but not that much ahead. They only want to be marginally ahead of the next man. Firstly, no. We want to absolutely dominate. We are competitive men who want to leave our competition in our wake. If I work 10 times harder than the next guy, I want to be able to create 100 times the resources because of the compounding effect, of course. And then I want to be able to dedicate that all to my mission in life. Secondly, we live in a world right now, the modern world, where the markets are globalized and the taxes in America are already stupidly high, which has prevented me from moving there. What do you think that all of the productive business owners would do if America tomorrow decided to introduce a 90% income tax? I'll tell you what they would do. They would say, okay, sure, buddy. Then they would take their business, their money, their employment opportunities, and their ingenuity to another country where they are treated better. It's really not rocket science. Either you have a reasonable tax rate where you only steal limited amounts of people's money, or you have this really high 90% tax rate and everybody just leaves and you get to steal none of their money. Now for Yaron's response.
So I hate this dominance theory. I think it's awful and terrible, and it justifies the worst kind of elements that would be critiqued against, that exist within society. Because it says that we're basically just regular animals. Some of us have this dominance thing, and we're willing to step on other lobsters to get to the top, and to hell with those other lobsters. And it's a zero-sum world, and we're going to destroy the competition in order to get to the top. And it's all about relative. I want to be better than the other guy. I think all of that is bullshit. I don't think any of that is true. We're not lobsters. We're human beings. And as human beings, we have the capacity to reason. We have the capacity to create stuff that doesn't exist before. We don't become wealthy at other people's expense like lobsters do. We actually create wealth that benefits everybody else around us because they all get to trade with us. So we don't rise to the top by stepping on other people like the lobster example. And we're not programmed to step on other lobsters and other human beings to advance. And we're not motivated. I don't believe for one iota Bill Gates looks at the top 400 wealthy and figures out where he is relative and motivated by getting higher up on the top of the list. None of these guys are motivated by that. If you know billionaires, what they're motivated by is the love of producing, the love of creating something, the love of making something beautiful. Yeah, he didn't create the iPhone, which is somewhere over there, because he wanted to be richer than somebody else. He created the iPhone because he was inspired by something beautiful that could change his life and our life. And trade for that. And yes, he wanted to make a lot of money, but the measure of money is not relative to other people. The measure of money is how much did I impact the world? Money is a symbol for how much value I've created. Because how do you become a billionaire? How do you become a billionaire? We talk about this abstraction of people having billions. But how did Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Bezos, these guys become billionaires? By trading with us. Did we win or lose from that trade? Well, why did we enter it? Why did we buy the iPhone? Why do we use Amazon? Because we believe that it makes our lives better. So we enter the trade because we believe we're going to make our lives better. So the only way for them to become billionaires is for millions, no, not millions, billions of us to trade with them in a way that we believe will make our lives better. So the only way for Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and these guys to become billionaires in a free market, we'll talk about the corrupt ones in a minute, I guess, is by making the world a better place for everybody else. By applying their own mind to a problem that exists out there, a problem of human survival, a problem of human production, and coming up with the best idea and then trading with other people, making their lives better in win-win relationships, in trader relationships, voluntary relationships, not relationship that are imposed, not relationship that is zero-sum relationship, not lobster-like relationships. Human beings are different. We're not predetermined by genetics to invent iPhones. It doesn't work that way. There's no way that we're predetermined to invent iPhones. You have to make choices. You have to use your reason. You actually have to think to come up with an iPhone or any product that's out there. We don't, even this building. Animals don't do this. They can't. Right? So billionaires become billionaires by making the world a better place. They do it by creating wealth, not by taking wealth. And the fact that 26 people are richer than 3.5 billion is because 26 people have created, objectively created, more wealth than 3.5 billion, because the fact is the 3.5 billion are barely surviving. All they're doing is they're farming and they're eating what they produce. And I bet you the net worth, by the way, in this room, I'm probably richer than all of you combined, or at least the students combined. I'll take out the adults, because your net worth is negative, because you've got student loans. It doesn't mean I'm rich. It just means I have a positive net worth. So 26 people actually created a lot of wealth. 3.5 billion, sadly, haven't created the wealth yet. If they lived under capitalism, they wouldn't be that poor.
So emphatic response there, and I do tend to agree. I mean, people who are generating billions of dollars, who have big companies, are generally doing so with a vision in mind. And it's watching that vision come to fruition and being able to expand your network of influence that is truly rewarding. And obviously, there are bad actors out there and bad influencers and people who are just motivated by money and power. But what I've found in my own personal experiences is that when I meet people who are richer, they generally tend to have a higher degree of integrity and of intelligence than other people. And I think that there's something to be said for that, because in order to get to the top, you have to be good with people. You have to understand the principle of reciprocity. You have to know how to win friends and influence enemies. It's really not easy. And I mean, I'm not rich, but the thing that does really motivate me in life in terms of career is to further my life's mission and to do meaningful things that have a real impact on the world. And I think that this is probably the case for a lot of people. I mean, you want to live a good, comfortable life, be able to do nice things and have options, but at the end of the day, the physical aspect of money or the physical aspect of stuff can only provide you with so much satisfaction. And once you have a certain amount of that, then you'd surely get used to it and it would become just another thing. And there has to be more of a greater purpose. Anyways, guys, I did mention that I had Yaron on the podcast, which is coming out soon. And whilst I agree with him about this notion, there are a few things that we don't exactly agree about it. And we actually got into it about the birth rates and we got into it about immigration amongst other things. And I think you will really enjoy that. So if you want early access to that, guys, you can go to Locals, rattlesnaketv.locals.com. The links will all be below for that. And if you're not aware, guys, Locals is like Patreon. It's a place where you can give as little as $5 a month to help support the channel. You can get early access to podcasts. You can ask the guests in the future questions. You can engage with the community and much more. And also, if you like the audio versions of the podcast, then just type in Reality Based, go search that on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and other streaming platforms. So now let's listen to the rest.
We all know there are people, say, for example, the Wells Fargo crisis. It's just absolutely appalling. And when you look it up, they knew exactly what they were doing. And so, you know, they were targeting people that couldn't speak the language. They were targeting people that were the elderly. These are the people, what is Wells Fargo? Like number 4, number 3 of the biggest banks? So, and they, in order to drive, like, so we have this system of capitalism that incentivizes like growth. So in order to fake their profits, because, you know, they have to show the people that want security for their stocks to rise up, they are faking sales.
Let me just, because you've been to Coke twice, let me just say that the Einman Institute does get a little bit of money for the Koch brothers. So just for you know, they pretty much give everybody who's in the free market world some money. So just for full disclosure. How do you protect against corruption? That's the only reason to have a government. It's to catch the crooks, right? That's the one thing the government should do. So if there's real fraud, then catch the real fraudsters. But the problem is today that that's not what the primary job of government is. So everybody remember Bernie Madoff? I know you guys are too young maybe, but Bernie Madoff, big pyramid scheme. He basically stole $63 billion from his friends and family members. Did the SEC catch him? SEC, responsible for protecting us from fraud in the securities market. Did they catch him? No. They got a report twice from a hedge fund that said, this guy's a crook. Here's what he's doing. And they couldn't catch him. They couldn't get him. Why? Why couldn't the SEC get him? Because the fact is the SEC is not about catching crooks. The SEC is about monitoring my behavior. I'm not a crook, just so full disclosure. I happen to be in the financial in the financial business as a business on the side, and I do some buying and selling. But the SEC monitors everything I do. I have to file a 13D and a 13G and a 13 this and a, you know, and then they send in their inspectors to, you know, I have a whole compliance office. I have a whole thing of compliance where they come in and look at my books. They're so busy monitoring what I'm doing that who has time to catch crooks? Indeed, they almost never catch crooks. It's rare that they actually file. Usually, who catches the crooks? The market does. In the case of Bernie Madoff, who caught him? Well, the hedge fund guy who wrote the memos twice, and who landed up at the end catching him? His son. His son called in the police. So, if the government actually did its job, its one job, which is to protect us from crooks and criminals and fraudsters, the world will be different. And just to relate to the Wells Fargo example, in capitalism, there are no bailouts. By definition, capitalism is anti-bailouts. There's no too big to fail in capitalism. I'd go further. There's no deposit insurance in capitalism. Yet why do people keep their deposits in Wells Fargo in spite of the fact that they've committed fraud? Because who cares? If something really bad happens to Wells Fargo, the government's going to step in and pay me back, right? Unless you've got more than $250,000. Who's got more than $250,000 in the bank account? Like, okay, one guy, right? That's pretty amazing, right? Right? They're trying to protect the little guy with deposit insurance. Really, how many little guys have $250,000 in their bank account? So the whole system is corrupt. The whole mechanism of the world in which we live in today is corrupt. Not corrupted by capitalism, corrupted by statism. As soon as you have deposit insurance, now you have to have the regulations to monitor the banks. And then if the bank is very big, it has systemic risks, so we have to bail you out. So by the way, if you have more than $250,000 in your bank account, here's a tip. for those wealthy students among you. If you have more than $250,000 in a bank, always put it in a too big to fail bank. So Wells Fargo is a good place for $250,000. Bank of America is a good place. Don't put it in your local community bank, because when it fails, you won't get your money. You'll get everything up to 250, but not above. But if Wells Fargo fails, they'll bail them out. They've told us they'll bail them out. It's in the, so what, you talk about incentives. When you tell somebody, when you make money, you get to keep it all, but when you lose it, we'll bail you out. What kind of behavior do you expect to get? Pretty nutty behavior, right? And that's what we get. So that's not capitalism. There's no bailouts in capitalism. There's none of this stuff in capitalism. Capitalism is a system where the government does one thing. It protects us from the crooks.
So super interesting perspective from an interesting guy there about capitalism and what happened during the GFC in 2008. And a lot of the detractors of capitalism will actually point to that event and say, see, there's an example of why capitalism leads to destruction, and it's a big bubble just waiting to pop. But he's right in the sense that capitalism in its purest form wouldn't have big governments bailing out the banks. Because in that sense, you play silly games with money and the market and you get silly consequences. So yeah, I mean, what he said is also true about the banks. I mean, if you've got a certain amount of money, put it in the too big to fail banks. Because if anything happens, they'll just get bailed out, especially in these times of economic uncertainty, with everything happening around the world, with the de-dollarization, crazy times ahead. So that's it for me today, guys. All those links that I mentioned will be below, locals and the audio platforms and social medias, etc. If you guys would like to subscribe to the channel, right here. And if you'd like to watch another video, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.